I want to tell you a little bit about, I told you about my ancestors. I want to tell you a little bit about how I came to Unitarian Universalism, because I've been a Unitarian Universalist for 30 years, ever since my parents joined my home church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, when I was 6. And the little kid that they brought to church with them was, I want you to try to picture in your mind's eye, this tiny, little, blonde-haired, blue-eyed firecracker. Huge personality. I really wanted to have long hair like Ariel in The Little Mermaid, which had just come out. And I was doomed to failure because my hair is not weighty enough to grow past the scraggly here, but I was determined. So I was obsessed with The Little Mermaid, and my mom made me this wonderful Halloween costume of a tail and a little, a seashell situation. And I just wore it all year round, basically. I was just obsessed. I used to sit in our front yard. Remember, I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I used to sit in our front yard imagining the amazement of all the people driving by at why there was a mermaid so far from the water. We took a road trip to visit my great-grandmother, who actually lived in Rockport, Massachusetts, and she had this ocean view cottage, which was amazing. And I distinctly remember the lengths that my mom had to go to keep me from wearing my tail the whole 3-day road trip there, and then quickly throwing myself, I had this whole vision, throwing myself onto these beautiful rocks in her front yard, Rockport, and she, my mom would say, you're gonna give her a heart attack. She'll be too surprised to see a mermaid in her yard, please. But what really made me a mermaid in my mind and in my heart was not the outfit, but the music. I memorized all of the songs and sang them everywhere, including at church. Legend has it that it was my earnest belting of Part of Your World in the lower level that inspired the music director to create a kids' choir at my home church. So the year 1990 marked the year that both The Little Mermaid and also the 1960 Broadway production of Peter Pan, starring Mary Martin, were released on VHS. And these two musicals really became the backdrop of my early childhood. I was mesmerized by both title characters. My very favorite childhood memory was my 7th birthday party, where I had a Peter Pan themed party, and all the guests had to come in costume, and I was Tinker Bell, obviously, and I downright forced my best friend to come as Peter Pan. In true to Broadway fashion, my dad played a Captain Hook to rival Dustin Hoffman's and chased us all around the house and yard for hours. It was absolutely magic. I was deeply blessed to have parents and a church that gave me complete and total freedom of expression. No one ever told me I wasn't a mermaid or a fairy. No one ever tried to hush my song. The first 7 years of my life were full of magic brought to me through art and books. I was a rough and tumble princess who loved bugs and dinosaurs and dresses that could be twirled in. All of my best friends were boys, and I was the ringleader. No, really, I actually played the ringleader in a kindergarten and circus production. Right? Can you see it? It really wasn't until 3rd grade that things changed, that the fairy tale world that I invited everyone around me to join me in was challenged. That was the year that the other kids on the playground started letting me know in no uncertain terms that I wasn't following the rules for being a girl. You see, I was able to have this carefree childhood because everyone around me assumed I was a girl. After all, I wore pigtails and princess dresses and sometimes a tail, but the adults in my life never picked up on my gender nonconformity. But it was only a matter of time before my peers did. I started 3rd grade in love with life and with school. But by the end of the year, I had lost my spark. I'd always thought of everyone as my friend, but now lines were being drawn, and I didn't understand any of the rules. No longer could I wear the frilliest dress I wanted every day and run with the boys without being sneered at and mercilessly teased for both my excessive femininity and also my perceived masculinity. So I made a conscious choice to try to follow the gender rules I didn't understand. I turned my back on my best friend, joined a crew of girls, tamped down the fairy tale part of myself, and tried to fit in. But it only made me more miserable. My new friends cooed over New Kids on the Block and had portraits of Justin Taylor Thomas on their bedroom walls. They played games that revolved around things like marriage and motherhood. Far from being able to fit in, I only felt more and more like a square peg in a round hole. My parents came through for me. They had no idea why I was miserable, but they had a sense that if I stuck with the same group of kids and the same school system, things wouldn't get any better. So they gave me the chance to go to a middle school for the arts across town. And once again, my life had creativity and vibrancy and more musicals. Very important. I still felt adrift, but I slowly carved out a space for myself with other misfits. It would be 10 years before I was able to reclaim that unbridled joy and fabulosity of my 6-year-old self. But honestly, 10 years of seeking and becoming feels pretty darn lucky to me as a genderqueer, non-binary person who grew up with no sense that there were other people out there like me, other people who weren't girls or boys. No representations of people like me beyond Mary Martin as Peter Pan. I found a way anyway. I found people who saw me as I truly am, loved me for my contradictions and fairy tale nature, and reflected who I was back to me when I was racked with self-doubt. I found more music, and I kept on singing, slowly journeying back to myself. The popular mainstream story of what it means to be trans is one of absolutes and pain. The visceral, hidden knowledge of who you are from a young age, the unspeakable suffering of being forced to live as someone you're not, the agonizing decision to tell the world who you really are, the transition that marks a closed door on the past and the emergence of the real, true you. This story isn't wrong. It is many people's story, but it's not the only story. It's not my story. My story is a story of a lifelong journey and dedication to living authentically. It's a story of constantly exploring, questioning, and becoming myself. It's a story of being a mermaid and a fairy and a boy who never grows up. It's a story of knowing who I'm not long before I could articulate who I am. But ultimately, it's a story of joy. Every single day now, I get to make an active choice to be my fullest, most glorious self, the self I was made to be. And I'm here to testify that when you have been told by the world that who you are is impossible, who you are doesn't exist, and you laugh and say, "Oh, honey, do I look like I don't exist to you?" That feeling, the feeling of knowing yourself and being yourself despite it all, it's the best feeling in the world. It makes me feel like I can fly. My best friend, Michael, who is a queer and trans Black man and an ordained minister, talks about how he was called to be the person that he is. "Who I am right now is who I am called to be," he says. "I don't know how or when that happened, and I can't explain it, but I know that it is true. And so I move toward that call every day in all the ways that I can." As I reflect on Trans Day of Visibility, which is celebrated annually on March 31st, this is what visibility means to me. It means taking the risk to live authentically. It means being visibly, authentically you. The most you version of yourself. The you that you are called to be. You see, there's a spark in each of us, not just trans people, but all people. A spark that refuses to go out, no matter what the world throws at us. There's something that pulls us forward and compels us to be who we are meant to be. When we live from that place of authenticity, that's when we come truly alive. And when we are truly alive, we bring that aliveness forward in everything that we do. All of our relationships, our work, our activism, our art, our play. In her incredible book, Redefining Realness, Janet Mock, a Black and Native Hawaiian trans woman, writes, "Self-definition and self-determination is about the many varied decisions that we make to compose and journey toward ourselves, about the audacity and strength to proclaim, create, and evolve into who we know ourselves to be." That's what transition means. Transition doesn't mean surgery or hormones or pronouns. It means journeying toward ourselves. Transition doesn't mean changing genders. In the words of Janet Mock again, it means revealing who we've always been. For me, journeying toward myself and revealing who I've always been was a process of reclamation. It was a process of rejecting the rules and the boxes and the limits that had been placed on me by our wider culture, everything I was forcibly taught about who I was supposed to be and how I was supposed to act based on who the world perceived me to be. What have you been taught about who you are supposed to be and how you are supposed to act based on who the world has perceived you to be? And based on what the world thinks of as the most normal and valuable way to be. I think of my grandmother, Lee Kapitan, who was at the top of her high school class, but was passed over for a scholarship because she was a woman. I think of my dear friend, Lynn Young, who was socialized to be and act white and ignore their Lakota heritage and identity. I think of all of my friends who have been told to hide their queerness or their disabilities or their class background in order to fit in. Living by other people's definitions and perceptions shrinks us to shells of ourselves rather than complex people embodying multiple identities, says Janet Mock. But every day, we get to make a choice about who we are going to be. Every day is a chance to proclaim, create, and evolve into who we know ourselves to be. Every day is an opportunity to access the joy in living authentically. Now, don't get it twisted. Living your most visible, authentic life doesn't mean you have to tell everyone you meet every single facet of your life story and history, right? And I don't want you to think that just because I chose to share a little about my 6-year-old self with you today, you're entitled to know the childhood story of every trans person who crosses your path. My vulnerability in sharing that adorable little self that I was with you comes from a place of wanting to share more about who I have always been. Sharing with you some of the fullness of my sparkly, gender-overflowing, non-binary self helps you to see the real me, my authentic self, rather than assuming that I'm a man simply because I'm currently sporting some fabulous facial hair. I don't actually need to share anything with you in order to be my full self, because I know who I am, and I live fully from that place of truth. That's what visibility means to me. My partner, Teddy, would just as soon move through the world without anyone knowing that he was assigned female at birth. He is living his most visible, authentic life as a man. Being a woodworking, blue-collar, kind, and gentle man is how he comes most alive and shares his aliveness with the world. Every day, he gets to decide what kind of man he's going to be. Visibility is about the joy that comes from being himself, not the shock factor of telling other people that he's trans. Does that make sense? You don't owe anyone any explanation about what has led you to your truth. You only owe yourself the chance to live from that place of truth. There's a new term that has taken off among young trans and non-binary folks in recent years. It's gender euphoria. Have you heard it? Isn't it wonderful? It describes the flip side of gender dysphoria, that sense of profound wrongness in your own skin. Gender euphoria is the sense of profound rightness and joy that comes with being your true self. Folks will say things like, OMG, my mom finally called me by my chosen name today, and it made me so happy. Or, these heels make me so euphoric. I want everyone to experience that kind of joy. Every single person. The sort of joy that comes with living authentically. What is it about this culture that we live in that trans people are only affirmed as real and visible through the avenue of our deepest pain and suffering? For decades, the gatekeepers of this society have said, I'll only believe that you are who you say you are if you can prove to me that you would rather die than live as the person I perceive you to be. What if we honored each other's joy more than each other's pain? What if we said, I see and validate you and recognize your gender euphoria, rather than needing a person's gender dysphoria to get so bad that the only last-ditch option for survival is acknowledgement of who they truly are. Trans Day of Visibility was born a few years back, not as some trans-specific National Coming Out Day, but rather, you don't have to leave, I love it. It's not about being a trans version of National Coming Out Day, but rather as a corollary to Trans Day of Remembrance. Trans folks were answering the call from trans women of color to give us our flowers while we're still alive. Instead of the only International Day of Recognition of trans people being the day on which we mourn those lost to anti-trans violence, they created a day for trans joy, euphoria, authenticity, resilience, thriving. And this year, this day is bittersweet, if not downright painful. This year, trans people are experiencing an all-out assault on our very existence, with more than 400 anti-trans bills proposed in state legislatures across the country. Bills, too many of which are being passed into law that seek to criminalize, control, and eradicate transness. Visibility has always carried a risk of violence for us. And now this violence is happening on a scale and in a way that we've never seen before. I hope you'll join us for the town hall event that's happening across the street at the Arts Center at 2 p.m. today to hear more about what's happening and how you can help defend trans lives. But let's not stop there. Let's not end there. My friends, trans people are a model for all of us for the joy in living authentically. Each and every person has a homing beacon, and that beacon is joy. The voice that calls us to be our most authentic, joy-filled, euphoric selves that brings us most alive. On this day, as we honor trans visibility, trans resilience, and trans joy, I want to invite you to consider who you are called to be. To what wholeness are you called? What parts of yourself have you hidden away, buried, or boxed because of the expectations or perceptions of others? What would it look like if you let them shine? What will you do on this day and all the days that follow to claim your authenticity in new ways and fight for everyone to be able to live visibly, authentically, in joy? Every day we have a choice. My commitment to living authentically is to choose joy and fight for every other person to have the chance to do so. I hope you will too. Amen. Ashe. Aho. And blessed be.